Hey guys, Sam Review here. I'm going to pick up on Edward's part of Twilight Saga Illustrated Guide by Stephanie Myers. I don't get paid for this. This is just for fun. No copyright infringement intended. Everything belongs to Stephanie Myers. Blah, 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 blah. Let's get going. Edward's personal history. Edward was born to Edward and Elizabeth Mason on June 20th, 1901. He was their only child. His father was a successful lawyer, provided Edward with many advantages, including music lessons and the opportunity to attend private school. However, although his father provided Edward in material ways, he was emotionally distant and often away from home on business. The absence was made up by Edward's close relationship with his mother. He was the center of her life. Edward excelled in his studies, became an accomplished pianist. As he grew older, Edward became enamored in the life of a soldier. World War One raged during most of his adolescence. Edward dreamed of the day he could join the battle. His mother's greatest fear was she would lose Edward in the war. Every night she prayed that it would end before her only son turned 18 and was old enough to enlist. 9 months before his 18th birthday, the Spanish influenza hit Chicago, infecting all of Edward's family. Gravely ill, they were treated in the hospital when Dr. Carlisle Cullen worked, where Dr. Carlisle Cullen worked. Edward's father quickly succumbed to the disease on his deathbed and fearing for her son's life. Is Elizabeth Mason begged Dr. Cullen to do what was necessary to save her son. Somehow she seemed to know Dr. Cullen had a supernatural means to save Edward. Unfortunately, Edward isn't based on anybody. He is all imagination and wishing. I think his allure is partly due to his old-fashioned manners. He's a gentleman, and those are hard to come by these days. A quote by Stephanie Meyer. And this is a quote from chapter 15 of Twilight. And then his fingers flowed swiftly across the ivory, and the room filled with a composition so complex. So, I'm going to butcher this word. Luxuranit, Luxuranit. It was impossible to believe one set of hands played. Moved by Elizabeth Mason's plea, having already thought, considered the idea, already thoroughly considered the idea of a companion, Carlisle took Edward from the hospital late that night, carrying the unconscious boy. It was home. There, Edward was the first human Carlisle changed into a vampire. Edward formed a bond with Carlisle, who became a father to him, gaining Edward's trust and loving the way his natural father never had. It was Carlisle who first realized that Edward possessed the ability to read minds. He noticed Edward was answering questions that Carlisle did not ask aloud. Edward has always had a knack for reading people after his transformation. This ability blossomed into a true psychic talent. Edward's new family gained a member when Carlisle transformed Esme to save her life after an unaliving attempt. Edward was young enough to appreciate the care of a mother, and Esme gave it to him. Edward grew to love his new father and mother as much as he respected Carlisle's ideal values, Esme's gentle and tenderness. He couldn't help questioning what it meant to be a vampire. Almost a decade of living with Carlisle, Edward decided to leave his new parents to experience an alternate style of vampire life. He began drinking human blood instead of animal blood, rather than becoming a true villain in his own intent. Esiamin. He became vigilant. Edward used his mind reading abilities to target serious criminals to his victims: murderers, arsonists, abusers, P. And his first victim, he tracked down Charles Evans, Esme's abusive ex-husband. In the end, he couldn't accept taking so many human lives, no matter the justification. and in 1931 he returned home to Carlisle and Esme and their way of life. Edward knew from hearing his thoughts that Carlisle and Esme were sometimes concerned that he had no romantic love in his life. When Carlisle transformed Rosalie Hale and brought her into the family in 1933, Edward knew that Carlisle and Esme hoped that Edward would become she and Edward would become a couple. She was, but stunningly beautiful as Rosalie physically, Edward was not attracted to her. Somewhat shallow in her self-absorbed mind, there's a feeling was mutual. Edward and Rosalie was always treated each other like brother and sister, and they were not always on the best terms. When the Cullen family lived in Alaska, Edward had opportunity to find romance this time with Tanya, the leader of the Denali Coven, a group of practice that could also practice a vegetarian lifestyle. Though Tanya was interested in Edward, he did not return interest. It wasn't until the Cullen family returned to Forks in 2003 that anyone captured Edward's attention. There, Edward met a human girl named Bella Swan. Bella was remarkably different from every other person he had ever met. In two impossible ways to overlook. First, her blood sank to him. There's no the way no other human had. Second, her mind was the first he ever encountered where it was totally closed to his mind reading abilities. This is what Red Text says. I like Edward, not that he's clean cut, that he has a dark side, that he's doing things that are clearly not legal or illegal. I'm going to stop here. Talk to y'all later. So move you out.